She was cleaning her garage when she found a trapdoor that shouldn't exist. Her neighbors laughed, convinced it was just old foundation work. But when her border collie started whimpering and refused to go near the corner, Elena realized this hidden entrance was guarding a secret that would shatter everything she thought she knew about her quiet suburban home. Subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments what's the strangest thing you've ever found in your house. The town of Riverdale sprawled across rolling hills 30 miles south of Portland, a collection of modest neighborhoods where young professionals came to escape city rents and raise families. Elena Vasquez had moved to 1247 Birchwood Lane 8 months ago, drawn by the promise of a fresh start after her divorce from David became final. At 35, she was rebuilding her life from scratch, leaving behind a decade of marriage that had slowly suffocated her dreams of independence. The house was a split-level built in 1982, nothing fancy but solid and affordable on her graphic designer's salary. The previous owners, an elderly couple named the Hendersons, had maintained it well but left behind decades of accumulated possessions. Elena had been working through the cleanup methodically, room by room, finding a strange comfort in the process of clearing away other people's memories to make space for her own. Her constant companion through this transition was Luna, a 3-year-old border collie she'd adopted from the local rescue shelter. The dog had been her first act of independence after the divorce, a decision David had always vetoed during their marriage. Luna was intelligent, energetic, and seemed to understand that they were both starting over together. The dog followed Elena everywhere, as if afraid that this new life might disappear if she let her human out of sight. Elena worked as a freelance graphic designer, mostly handling small business branding and marketing materials. The work was steady enough to pay the mortgage, and she'd converted the spare bedroom into a home office. After years of corporate meetings and compromise, she relished the creative freedom of choosing her own projects and setting her own schedule. Saturday mornings had become her favorite time, when she could tackle house projects without the pressure of client deadlines. It was on a cool October morning that she decided to finally address the garage. The Hendersons had used it primarily for storage, stacking boxes and furniture with the methodical precision of people who never threw anything away. Elena had been putting off the project for weeks, intimidated by the sheer volume of items that needed sorting, donating, or discarding. She started early, wearing old jeans and a faded college sweatshirt, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Luna supervised from the driveway, occasionally investigating interesting smells, but mostly content to watch her human work. The October air was crisp with the promise of winter, and Elena found herself enjoying the physical labor after a week spent hunched over her computer designing logos. The work was surprisingly therapeutic. Each cleared corner revealed more space, more possibility. She sorted items into piles, donate, trash, and the small, maybe category for things that might be useful someday. The Hendersons had left behind gardening tools, holiday decorations, boxes of books, and furniture that had seen better days. As she worked deeper into the garage, Elena noticed that Luna's behavior began to change. The dog, normally eager to explore every corner and crevice, started avoiding the back left corner entirely. When Elena called her over to investigate a particularly heavy box, Luna would approach partway, then stop abruptly, ears flattening against her head. "What's wrong, girl?" Elena asked, but Luna only whined softly and retreated to the safety of the driveway. By midday, Elena had made significant progress. She'd cleared enough space to see the back wall clearly for the first time. That's when she noticed something odd about the concrete floor. Near the corner where Luna refused to go, there was a faint rectangular outline in the cement, almost invisible unless you were looking directly down at it. Elena knelt beside the strange marking, running her fingers along what appeared to be a deliberately cut seam. The edges were too clean, too precise to be a natural crack in the foundation. She'd helped David with enough home improvement projects during their marriage to recognize the difference between accidental damage and intentional construction. The rectangular outline measured approximately 3 feet by 4 feet. Whatever it was, it had been carefully integrated into the floor, flush with the surface but clearly delineated by the finest of gaps. Elena fetched a flashlight from her toolkit and examined the seam more closely. In the harsh LED light, she could see that the concrete inside the rectangle was slightly different in color and texture from the surrounding floor. Puzzled, she called her neighbor, Patricia Kowalski, a retired teacher who lived next door and seemed to know everything about everyone in the neighborhood. Patricia had been friendly and helpful since Elena moved in, often sharing garden vegetables and local gossip over the fence that separated their backyards. "Oh, that's probably just where they had to patch some utility work," Patricia said when Elena described the finding. She barely glanced at the outline before dismissing it with a wave of her hand. "These older houses, they're always having foundation issues. The Hendersons were constantly dealing with something. I wouldn't worry about it, dear." But Elena couldn't dismiss it so easily. Her work as a graphic designer had trained her eye to notice details that others overlooked, to see patterns and inconsistencies that revealed deeper truths about visual composition. This felt like more than a simple repair patch. That evening, she researched the house's history online. The county records showed it had been built by Clearwater Construction in 1982, originally sold to Robert and Margaret Henderson. They'd lived there for 38 years, raising 2 children who had both moved out of state after college. The original building permits showed a standard split-level design with an attached 2-car garage. Nothing unusual, nothing that would explain a deliberately cut section in the floor. Elena spent her Sunday morning at the local hardware store, chatting with Frank Morrison, the owner who'd been serving Riverdale residents for over 20 years. Frank was a walking encyclopedia of local construction knowledge, and Elena hoped he might shed some light on her discovery. The Hendersons? Frank scratched his gray beard thoughtfully. Yeah, they were regular customers. Bob was always working on some project or another. Meticulous guy, really detail-oriented. But I can't recall them ever mentioning anything about the garage floor. Frank's expression grew curious when Elena described the rectangular outline. "You know, that does sound unusual. Most foundation work doesn't leave such clean lines. You might want to look into it further." His words only deepened Elena's curiosity. Back home, she decided to conduct a simple test. She filled a small bucket with water and slowly poured it along the seam. Instead of pooling on the surface as it should have on solid concrete, the water disappeared almost immediately, seeping through cracks so fine they were barely visible to the naked eye. There was definitely empty space beneath the floor. Luna's anxiety around the corner had intensified over the weekend. The dog, normally confident and curious, now refused to enter the garage at all. She would stand at the threshold, whimpering and pacing, her intelligent brown eyes fixed on the corner where Elena had made her discovery. "It's okay, Luna," Elena murmured, but she was beginning to wonder if her dog sensed something she couldn't. Border Collies were known for their intelligence and sensitivity to environmental changes. Maybe Luna was picking up on something subtle that human senses couldn't detect. Elena spent Monday evening researching the Henderson family more thoroughly. She found Margaret Henderson's obituary from 2 years ago, followed by Robert's from 18 months later. They'd been described as pillars of the community, active in their church and local charities. Robert had worked as an accountant for a regional firm for 35 years, while Margaret had been a librarian at Riverdale Elementary School. Nothing in their public records suggested any reason for hidden spaces or secret construction projects. They seemed to have lived quiet, conventional lives, marked by community service and family gatherings. Yet something had motivated them to create this hidden feature in their garage floor. Elena's professional instincts were fully engaged now, just as she approached design problems by asking why certain visual elements existed and what story they were meant to tell. She found herself compelled to understand the purpose behind this hidden construction. Every design choice had a reason, and this was clearly a deliberate design choice. On Tuesday morning, she called in sick to her freelance commitments and drove to the county building to examine the original construction permits more carefully. The clerk, a helpful woman named Joyce, pulled the files and let Elena study them in detail. The original blueprints showed nothing unusual about the garage construction. Standard concrete slab foundation, basic electrical and lighting, garage door installation. But as Elena examined the permits more closely, she noticed something interesting. 3 months after the original construction was completed, Robert Henderson had filed for an additional permit listed simply as Utility Modifications, Garage Area. The permit had been approved quickly with minimal documentation. No detailed plans, no specifications, just a brief note about plumbing adjustments. But the Henderson house was connected to city water and sewer, and the main lines ran along the street, not under the garage. "I'd like to see any inspection records for this permit," Elena asked Joyce. After some searching, Joyce returned with a puzzled expression. "That's odd. The permit shows as completed, but I can't find any inspection reports. Usually we keep detailed records of all work, especially anything involving excavation." Elena left the county building with more questions than answers. The paper trail suggested that Robert Henderson had done some kind of officially sanctioned work in the garage, but the documentation was suspiciously sparse for what appeared to be significant construction. That afternoon, she made a decision that would change everything. She drove to the hardware store and rented a concrete saw, along with safety equipment and a small jackhammer. Frank Morrison raised an eyebrow at her selections. "Planning some major renovations?" he asked. "Something like that," Elena replied, not quite ready to explain her growing obsession with the garage floor mystery. As she loaded the equipment into her SUV, she noticed an older man watching her from across the parking lot. He was thin, perhaps in his 70s, wearing a windbreaker despite the mild weather. When their eyes met, he quickly looked away and walked toward a faded blue sedan. Something about his behavior struck her as odd, but Riverdale was a small town where people noticed unusual activities. Back home, Elena set up the equipment in her garage, while Luna watched anxiously from the backyard. The dog had positioned herself as far from the garage as possible, while still maintaining visual contact with Elena, her ears alert and body tense. Elena marked out a section of the concrete rectangle and started the saw. The blade cut through easily at first, confirming that this wasn't the same thick foundation concrete as the rest of the floor. Whatever lay beneath had been designed for access. As she worked, cutting a careful square about 2 feet on each side, dust filled the air and the sound echoed through the neighborhood. She was grateful that most of her neighbors were at work and wouldn't be disturbed by the noise. When she finally broke through the concrete layer, a rush of stale air escaped from below. The smell was distinctive, not unpleasant, but definitely not what she'd expect from a crawl space. It carried hints of old paper, metal, and something else she couldn't identify. Elena cleared away the concrete chunks and peered into the opening with her flashlight. Below was a chamber lined with what appeared to be metal walls, extending deeper than should have been possible under a standard garage foundation. And at the bottom, clearly visible in her flashlight beam, was something that made her heart race. A ladder, leading down into a darkness that seemed to stretch far beyond the footprint of her house. As Elena stared into the hidden chamber beneath her garage, her mind raced with questions that had no logical answers. This wasn't just a storage space or forgotten utility access. Someone had built this deliberately, professionally, secretly. The metal walls were too precise, too intentional. And the ladder suggested this space was meant to be used regularly. From the backyard, Luna's whimpering grew more insistent, and Elena realized her dog had been trying to warn her all along. Animals possessed senses that humans had lost, instincts that detected danger before reason could process it. Now, looking into that carefully constructed darkness, Elena understood why her companion had been afraid. Whatever lay beneath her suburban home had been hidden for nearly 4 decades. The Hendersons had carried this secret through decades of ordinary life, maintaining the facade of conventional suburban existence while something extraordinary lay hidden beneath their feet. Elena gripped the edge of the opening, her designer's eye noting the quality of the construction, the attention to detail that spoke of significant planning and resources. This wasn't the work of amateurs or weekend hobbyists. Someone had invested serious time, money, and expertise into creating this hidden space. As she prepared to climb down that ladder into the unknown, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that some secrets were buried for reasons that had nothing to do with shame or embarrassment. Some secrets were buried because they were dangerous. Elena stood at the edge of the opening for several long minutes, her designer's mind processing the implications of what she'd discovered. The metal lining wasn't just functional. It was professional grade, the kind of work that required permits, inspections, and significant investment. Yet somehow the Hendersons had managed to construct this without leaving proper documentation. Luna's whimpering from the backyard grew more insistent, but Elena knew she couldn't turn back now. She'd spent 8 months rebuilding her life after the divorce, learning to trust her own instincts rather than deferring to others' opinions. Her gut told her this discovery was important, potentially life-changing. She secured a rope around her waist, tied it to her SUV's trailer hitch for safety, and began her descent. The ladder was sturdy, clearly built to last, with each rung firmly welded to the metal framework. As she climbed down, her flashlight revealed walls lined with what appeared to be steel sheeting, professionally installed with no visible seams or gaps. The chamber was deeper than she'd expected, at least 12 feet from the garage floor to the bottom. When her feet finally touched solid ground, she found herself in a rectangular room approximately 10 feet by 15 feet. The ceiling was high enough for her to stand comfortably, and ventilation ducts suggested this space had been designed for extended occupation. But it was the contents of the room that made Elena's breath catch in her throat. The space was meticulously organized, like a combination office and archive. Metal shelving lined 3 walls, filled with binders, filing cabinets, and boxes labeled with dates spanning from 1982 to 2019. A desk sat in one corner, topped with an old computer, multiple monitors, and communication equipment that looked far more sophisticated than anything the average homeowner would need. Elena approached the nearest shelf and pulled down a binder labeled 1987 to 1990. Inside were hundreds of photographs, documents, and what appeared to be surveillance reports. The photographs showed people she didn't recognize, taken with telephoto lenses in various locations around what she slowly realized was Riverdale and the surrounding area. Her hands trembling slightly, she opened another binder. This one contained detailed dossiers on local residents, complete with personal information, financial records, family connections, and behavioral patterns. She recognized several names, current and former neighbors, local business owners, even Patricia Kowalski from next door. The scope of information was staggering. Someone had been systematically documenting the private lives of Riverdale residents for nearly 4 decades. But why? Elena moved to the desk and examined the equipment more closely. The computer was older but high-end for its time, connected to multiple external hard drives and what appeared to be encrypted communication devices. A logbook beside the keyboard contained entries in Robert Henderson's neat handwriting, detailing surveillance schedules, contact protocols, and coded references she couldn't decipher. As she flipped through the logbook, a pattern began to emerge. The entries weren't random observations. They were targeted intelligence gathering, focused on specific individuals and activities. References to subjects of interest, behavioral anomalies, and security assessments filled page after page. Elena sank into the desk chair, her mind reeling. The Hendersons hadn't been ordinary suburban retirees. They'd been operating some kind of surveillance operation from beneath their garage for decades, systematically gathering intelligence on their own community. Elena spent the next hour methodically examining the archives, trying to piece together the scope and purpose of the operation. The earliest files dated back to 1982, shortly after the house was built, suggesting this had been the Hendersons' purpose from the beginning. They hadn't stumbled into surveillance work. They'd moved to Riverdale specifically to establish this hidden facility. The filing system was extensive and well-organized. Separate sections covered different aspects of the operation: personnel files on local residents, financial tracking of businesses and individuals, communication logs with outside contacts, and what appeared to be mission reports summarizing various surveillance activities. In one filing cabinet, Elena discovered a collection of official-looking documents that made her blood run cold. Federal agency letterheads, classified markings, and authorization codes suggested the Hendersons had been working under government sanction. They weren't freelance voyeurs or paranoid retirees. They'd been federal assets, operating a long-term domestic intelligence gathering operation. The mission appeared to be monitoring a specific type of activity within suburban communities. References to sleeper cell identification, radicalization indicators, and domestic threat assessment appeared throughout the documentation. The Hendersons had been tasked with identifying potential security threats hiding within the facade of ordinary American life. Elena found detailed profiles on dozens of residents spanning multiple decades. Most were marked as cleared or no further interest, but several files contained red flags and escalation protocols. She recognized some of the names: families who had moved away suddenly, businesses that had closed unexpectedly, individuals who had experienced mysterious career setbacks. The picture that emerged was chilling. The Hendersons had been identifying people they deemed suspicious, and those people had systematically disappeared from the community through various means: job losses, family emergencies, legal troubles, or simple decisions to relocate. But perhaps most disturbing was what Elena found in the most recent files. The surveillance hadn't ended when Robert Henderson died 18 months ago. Someone else had been continuing the operation, accessing the facility and updating the files even after both original operators were gone. The most recent entry was dated just 6 weeks ago, shortly before Elena moved to Birchwood Lane. Her own name appeared in a new file, along with photographs of her house, her daily routines, and detailed background information about her divorce, financial situation, and reasons for relocating to Riverdale. Someone had been watching her since the day she arrived. Elena's hands shook as she opened her own file. The level of detail was invasive and thorough. Her freelance client list, bank account information, medical records, even transcripts of phone conversations she'd assumed were private. Whoever had taken over the operation possessed resources and access far beyond what local law enforcement could provide. At the bottom of her file was a preliminary assessment. Subject appears to be genuine civilian relocation. Continue monitoring for 90 days before final clearance determination. She was being evaluated, tested to determine whether she posed some kind of threat. But a threat to what? A voice called down through the opening. A man's voice, calm and authoritative. "Ms. Vasquez, I know you're down there. Please come up. We need to talk." Elena recognized the voice from somewhere, but couldn't immediately place it. After a moment of internal debate, she decided that hiding was pointless. Whoever this was already knew about the facility and had likely been monitoring her discovery from the beginning. She climbed the ladder slowly, emerging into the garage to find a man in his 60s waiting for her. He was well-dressed in a dark suit, with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. It took her a moment to recognize him as the man who had been watching her at the hardware store. "Agent Richard Caldwell, Department of Homeland Security," he said, showing her an identification badge. "I apologize for the dramatic circumstances, but your discovery has created a situation that requires immediate attention." Elena stared at him, still processing the implications of everything she'd found below. The Hendersons were federal agents? Assets, Caldwell corrected. They were civilians who agreed to operate a monitoring station in exchange for certain considerations. Robert Henderson had been an Army intelligence specialist before becoming an accountant. Margaret provided perfect cover as a local librarian with access to community information, and they were spying on their neighbors for 40 years? Caldwell's expression was matter of fact. They were protecting their neighbors. After September 11th, the federal government recognized that traditional surveillance methods weren't adequate for identifying domestic threats. Sleeper cells, radicalized individuals, and foreign operatives often hide in plain sight within suburban communities. The Henderson operation was part of a larger network designed to identify such threats before they could act. Elena felt sick. So they were documenting everyone's private lives, deciding who was suspicious based on what? Their politics? Their religion? Their skin color? Based on behavioral patterns, communication anomalies, financial irregularities, and other indicators that trained professionals know to watch for, Caldwell replied. The program has been remarkably successful. Several potential terrorist attacks have been prevented because of intelligence gathered through operations like this one. And what happens to people who get flagged as suspicious? Caldwell's pause was telling. They receive additional scrutiny. If concerns are validated, appropriate measures are taken to neutralize the threat. Elena thought about the families who had moved away suddenly, the business closures, the unexplained life disruptions. You ruin their lives. We protect innocent lives, Caldwell corrected firmly. Sometimes that requires difficult decisions. Elena backed away from him, her mind racing. And now you're going to neutralize me because I found your spy nest? On the contrary, Caldwell said, his tone becoming almost conversational. Your background check came back clean, and your behavior since discovering the facility has been exactly what we'd expect from a curious but law-abiding citizen. You're not a threat. Then why are you here? Because we have a proposition for you. Caldwell explained that the Henderson operation had been compromised by their deaths. The government needed someone to take over the monitoring station, someone who could maintain the facade of ordinary suburban life while continuing the surveillance mission. Elena's background in graphic design made her perfect for the technical aspects of the work, and her recent relocation provided cover for any behavioral changes neighbors might notice. "You want me to spy on my neighbors," Elena said flatly. "We want you to help protect them," Caldwell replied. "The threats are real, Ms. Vasquez. Foreign agents, domestic terrorists, criminal organizations, they all seek to blend into communities like Riverdale. Someone needs to watch for the signs." Elena looked around her garage, thinking about Luna's fearful reaction to this corner, about the violation of privacy she'd discovered below, about the lives that had been disrupted by suspicion and paranoia disguised as security. "And if I refuse? Then you'll sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. The facility will be sealed permanently, and you'll continue your life as a normal Riverdale resident. But you'll always wonder if you could have prevented something terrible by helping us." Elena considered her options. She thought about her fresh start in Riverdale, her desire for a quiet life after the chaos of her divorce. She thought about her neighbors, Patricia Kowalski and others, living their lives unaware they'd been watched and cataloged for decades. Finally, she made her decision. "I need time to think about it," Elena said. Caldwell nodded. "Take a week. But remember, this conversation never happened, regardless of what you decide. The facility's existence must remain secret." After he left, Elena sat in her garage for a long time, staring at the opening in the floor. Luna eventually approached cautiously, sensing her human's distress. Elena pulled the dog close, grateful for the unconditional loyalty that required no surveillance or evaluation. She thought about the price of security, the cost of safety, and the thin line between protection and paranoia. The Hendersons had spent 40 years of their lives documenting their neighbors' secrets, believing they were serving a greater good. But what happened to a community when trust was replaced by suspicion, when neighbors became subjects to be monitored rather than people to be known? As the sun set over Riverdale, Elena made her final decision. She would not become another Margaret Henderson, living a double life beneath the facade of suburban normalcy. Some secrets were too dangerous to keep, and some duties were too heavy for one person to bear. But she would keep the secret of what lay beneath her garage floor, sealing it away as a reminder that in the name of security, ordinary people could become complicit in extraordinary violations of trust. 2 days later, Elena had the concrete opening permanently sealed and the garage floor refinished. The chamber below remained intact but inaccessible, a buried monument to the paranoia that had infected even quiet suburban streets. She never heard from Agent Caldwell again, but sometimes she wondered if other houses in Riverdale contained similar secrets, if other neighbors carried the burden of watching and evaluating their community. Luna never went near that corner of the garage again, as if she could still sense what lay beneath. Elena's life returned to its quiet routine of freelance design work and suburban normalcy. But she never forgot the lesson of the hidden chamber, that the price of absolute security was the loss of the very community it claimed to protect. The trapdoor that shouldn't exist had revealed a truth that maybe should have stayed buried. Sometimes the most dangerous secrets aren't the ones we discover. They're the ones we choose to keep. If this story made you think about privacy, security, and trust in your own community, share it with someone who needs to remember that vigilance and paranoia are separated by the thinnest of lines. Subscribe for more stories that reveal the hidden truths in ordinary places.